Welcome to the Beau Show. CPAC in Dallas allows you to meet a lot of interesting, diverse people. Given my background in entertainment, I always try to find people who have been in my profession, especially those rare few who have made it out of Hollywood alive and can still stand as principled people. Hollywood is a city that zaps many of their souls, be it drugs, alcohol, or the casting couch. Without a foundation, you lose yourself. That's why I was so interested to speak with Robbie Starbuck, a director of many big-time music videos, who was rather humble in describing his accolades. He's also Cuban, and with all that's been happening lately in Cuba as its citizens protest and demand liberty and democracy and free speech under communist oppression, I thought it was a great time to sit down with him. Have a look. Welcome to the Beau Show. Today as my guest I have Robbie Starbuck. He comes from the world of Hollywood and entertainment like I do. Robbie, it's great to have you with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Robbie, I've known you now for a little bit of time, and so I'm going to probably touch on some things that I've heard you talk about before that the audience might not know. But first of all, about your background, I know that your family fled Marxism in Cuba.
Yep.
How did that make you into who you are today?
I mean, that's really the core of like my identity as a person, is having that family experience where your family works so hard forever and gets to a place where they should, have whatever it is, a home or whatever, and to lose all of it. That really informs that path that they went through my entire childhood. And like anybody, your childhood is really your basis for understanding for life. And so it runs in my DNA to sort of, try to sniff out Marxism. And I saw those signs 2013, that we were on that path. In 2015 is when I decided I've got to come out and talk about politics. I've got to be honest with people about where I stand, because I'm blessed to have this platform. I've got to use it.
What was the eureka moment for you, if there was? Was it what you were witnessing in Hollywood? If it was, I'd like to know some things you were witnessing that really turned the corner for you.
Yeah, so there's a number of things in Hollywood and outside. Outside Hollywood, it was really sort of the subversive way. Actually, this goes to both points. The subversive way the Democratic Party was sort of getting into bed with every one of our cultural institutions, and the way they were pushing out anybody who went outside of their prescribed notion of what was going to be okay, Seeing that and seeing how they placed people in certain positions of power made me arrive at that point where I said, if people like me don't stand up, there's going to be nobody like us left, and even if they exist, they'll live in such fear, they'll try to convince themselves they don't believe what they believe. And so it was not a question for me at that point. Once I arrived at that and I talked to my wife, she's from Texas. She was like, you need to go for it. She goes big. She was like, you got to do it. Who cares if you burn it all down? And I'm so lucky to have that support. But it was honestly at that point, it was really simple. It was like, do you want to sort of do the right thing for your family and for your forebears who risked everything for you to have a life? Or do you want to insulate your family and keep them safe, but maybe at the cost of the country you're supposed to love and fight for? And so that was it. It was simple.
That makes sense. When I saw you speak in Florida not that long ago, you talked about how conservatives don't invest in culture.
Yeah.
This is a bit of a blind spot, and it's something I don't think a lot of people maybe are even talking about at CPAC. So I want to give you the opportunity, as someone who comes from the world of Hollywood, from directing, from producing, to talk about why this has been a blind spot for conservatives for so long and what can be done about it.
Well, there's a multitude of factors. One being sort of there was a very different cultural attitude maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago in the conservative movement about entertainment as a whole, and sort of what values mattered and what was okay, what wasn't. And one of the things the conservative movement kind of lost sight of was subtlety. And so when they would do things, they would push a very overt message, whether it's politically or religiously or whatever it is. It'd be oriented towards something very overt. What the left did very intelligently, and it's how we've arrived at this place, is they did everything subtly. They would push subtle ideas about their value system, about what was okay, into entertainment that was just supposed to be entertaining. Starting with things like, innocuous things most people didn't really think about, like, oh, this kid's talking back to their parent, or they snuck out, or whatever it is. They were pushing values through every little thing they did. That's how we arrived at the point now where Blue's Clues has, Trans Day, where they sing to your kid about what being pangender is and, all these different things. We arrived at that place because of subtlety. 15, 20 years of that, getting into the psyche of a generation, really two generations, it takes you to that place where normalcy can be the overt thing. We went straight to overt, and that tends to shut people down. So what we really need is that investment in culture, and we are at a very different cultural place now. If you go out in CPAC and talk to people, every single one of these people will tell you they wish we had more entertainment. They wish we had more things to watch that fit my values. If you think about markets, like just from a financial perspective, there has not been a more underserved market than conservatives in America when it comes to entertainment. There's 3,000 something channels on TV? Maybe 5 even think that conservatives exist. Think about how insane that is. Now, what movie studio is making movies for conservatives? Really, there's only one, Daily Wire, and they just started. They're the only ones able to do it, high production quality, that are able to actually do what I'm talking about, pushing through a subtle message.
Yep.
None of the other ones, the majors, are doing anything, for us. They're doing everything to push leftism. So it seems like common sense, but sadly, for the people who control the money in the party, it hasn't been common sense. So we have to make the voice so loud that they go, okay, we've got to do this.
From a financial perspective, and since you've been involved on that end of things, especially in producing, you're talking about one studio. I'm also thinking about maybe like Provident under Sony too. But like, if it's so underserved and there would be a huge market for it, why have more studios not gotten in the business of it?
Fear. It's one of the only things that does not control people going after money is fear of their own reputation. And if you think about that, it shows you what a destructive moment we're at in America, where people who all they care about is money are afraid to go after it, if it even associates them to a conservative. That's why. You see these studios bending over backwards to make movies with about all kinds of crazy stuff. Nobody goes and watches the movies. Look at Netflix. They basically money launder to progressive studios. Nobody watches the movie on Netflix. They pay for the movie. Nobody watches it.
Yeah.
And then they launder back from the stuff that is cool. So this isn't about money for them. It's about cultural dominance. Look no further than Netflix. Look at their decisions. The people that they pay for documentaries from Cory Bush, AOC, the Obamas. Where's the documentaries on Clarence Thomas or whatever? Because they would be at least as watched as those are, if not more so.
And Reagan may do well. I'm curious to see how Reagan's going to do when it comes out. But how many big-time financiers or directors do you think are in Hollywood right now that would be willing to stick their necks out and make that type of content?
If a studio existed, a good number of really well-known directors are Republican in Hollywood.
They're just fearful.
They're not just only fearful, they don't want to use their own money to do it. That's one.
Yeah.
But because that's not how it works in Hollywood. You're always using somebody else's money to make things.
Right.
And so for them, they're like, yeah, I want to, but I don't want to do that. Let's not go that far. So if the money existed, though, the studio was there, there's a decent number who would be like, if they felt secure with it, that this is going to be here, they would go for it. That are people who've won Oscars. There's really good people that will do it. Talented people. Same with actors too. Some of our biggest actors in the country are Republican and are just terrified.
Yeah, they have to probably go underground with Friends of Abe and things like that,
100%,
right?
yeah.
I want to shift a moment to your race because you're running in my former city of Nashville, which I lived in for 10 years. A lot of people out there probably think Nashville is conservative, and it's not.
It's not. No.
So tell me what made you decide to run for this race and what you can do differently from your opponent.
Yeah, so Nashville, the district traditionally has been a Democrat district. It's actually changing this year. So redistricting happens this year. The new district is expected to only have part of Nashville in it, and the rest of it's going to be split up between other districts. So if that is the portion that we got, we don't know exactly which end in Nashville it would be. Let's say it's West Nashville. The makeup is very different on each side. So theoretically, new district would be Republican, but Nashville, the city, like say if you're running for mayor, very, left-leaning. We'll put it that way. But there has never been a better time to run in Nashville, no matter what your party is, because nobody likes the Coopers. One brother's the mayor, one is the rep that I'm running against.
Yep.
People seem to think that Jim Cooper, the rep I'm running against, will retire instead of running against me after the redistricting. But his brother's still mayor, so somebody's going to have to run against his brother, and that's going to be, it's the only time, if anybody was like, is there one time a Republican could win a race? I'm like, maybe this time Democrats even hate this guy. He's been the worst mayor. I never thought I would. I lived in L.A. I thought Garcetti was the worst mayor that anybody could ever have. somehow Cooper is a worse mayor than Garcetti. That's saying something.
And everybody I talk to in Nashville hates him.
Oh, yeah, they
just
do.
can't. You're right.
It doesn't
it's
matter
right
if they're
for
Democrats either. I know Democrats who are like, Robbie, I disagree with you on policy. I hate your policies. Man, I hate Cooper.
Right.
Like, they may be on that side, but they hate this guy. So these are people willing to vote for maybe somebody they don't fully agree with just to get rid of him.
And what would be your number one issue that you would take him on? I guess.
Well, school choice is one of the issues that just district. If I looked at the whole district and I said, what is something the whole district has in common that is a real problem? I mean, that's our civil rights issue of this generation. Because our district has a large African-American community, a large Latino community, and a large white community that is in rural areas where they don't always have the best school choices. And we want to give parents a choice. We want to say, we think you're smart enough, you know your kid well enough, you're going to make the best decision what school is good for them. You're going to know if you're willing to drive 20 miles to take them to school or not. That's a decision you should get to make as a parent, not me as the state or a government actor. That's really not our place. We don't know what's best for your kid. And so if we want to see, the outcomes there and how many things education affects, when you look at just long-term crime and poverty statistics, that's going to be paying dividends for decades, putting people in schools where they're going to excel. Yeah. So that's something that is going to be big for us. In general, outside of Nashville, the crime thing is not really much of an issue, but in Nashville, there is problems when it comes to crime. So that's something, it's hard because when you're in Congress, you don't really get to deal directly with local crime, but I can at least be, sort of a hammer and go after them for what they're failing to do and how they've abdicated their responsibility to keep our citizens safe. So it'll be good for even Nashville locally to have somebody who can kind of counterweight whatever Democrat they've got in there who's failing to act on crime, whether it's Cooper or they elect another one. There does need to be some accountability, and I think I'll be able to provide that.
We're content creators by trade. For those people out there, this whole theme of this conference is America Uncanceled. What do you think something the average person can do to push back on cancel culture?
Be uncancelable. My whole outlook on being canceled, and maybe this is by virtue of having gone through what we've been through with Hollywood, but I don't give people the power to. I really think at this point, if you lose a friend or you lose a customer, these are people who never really cared about you. If your opinion is something that brings out so much vitriol in them that they want nothing to do with you, is that really somebody that you have space for in your life? And I would say probably not, because I don't treat anybody differently. Because, honestly, you could be, if I met you today and you were like, I'm a socialist, but I could have a conversation with you. I'm not going to be like, I hate you. These people who think that way, that want to push us into these different camps where we're not supposed to be able to even talk to one another, they're the ones who are outside the norm of how we should be as human beings. So I would say be free, be who you are. Don't allow anybody to have that ability to cancel you. And I say that especially to elected leaders more than anybody. Some of the biggest cowards I know are elected leaders. They're so afraid of somebody not liking them, so afraid of the news not liking them. You just got to do you. They're not going to like you. Get over it.
Right.
Move on.
Right.
If you wake up every day thinking maybe today's the day the New York Times is going to like me, you're on drugs, okay?
Not going to happen.
They're not going to like you. So you might as well behave in a way that your voters are going to respect and like.
Be authentic.
Be authentic. Be a real person.
My last question for you is not political at all, but I want to know what project in your time, in your duration and tenure in Hollywood, you're most proud of having worked on, and also what your favorite film is. And I know that's a tough question.
This is a question. This is one I actually have to think about.
Yeah, exactly. I know you weren't going to be prepared for it, but I thought so one you're most proud of that you were associated with, and then perhaps your favorite film. Or you can pick one of the two.
My favorite film in recent history, because I watched a lot of black and white movies, and a lot of those are probably my favorites, but no one will know what they are. So I'll go with probably every Chris Nolan movie. I love Chris Nolan. I think he's the best film director that we've got alive. He's fantastic. And then any Daniel Day-Lewis movie. He's my favorite actor. So favorite actor,
he's mine as well, actually.
So
good choice.
Those are the two guys who I respect their craft, what they do. They're meticulous. They're just absolutely incredible at what they do. So those are big ones. I like Michael Bay too in sort of a weird way. It's like one of those I've worked with him, so it's like, it's not like the traditional, like, he's not like the traditional, like, oh, he's such a great, he's exciting, though. Like, he does things outside the box, and people don't realize how hard it is to direct action scenes, nobody directs action scenes like he does. If people understood how technically difficult some of those scenes are, where they think, like, he just blows stuff up, those scenes are so hard to do. So it's like, from a technical perspective, I respect him the most because his setups are actually so incredibly intricate and difficult to do. So that part's pretty cool, you know.
Even if Team America makes fun of Pearl Harbor.
even
and then, so what would you say you're most proud of having worked on in your time in Hollywood? Is there anything that really stands out to you with your personal labor?
I'll be super honest. This is probably a bad answer, but I never really cared an immense amount about family has always been the most important thing to me. So it's like, it was hard for me to put, like, I'll put it this way. When I was up for, like, big awards, like the VMAs and stuff, like, I never even went to the award shows. I'm like I don't care. You know, I just didn't care. Like, this is...
But you care about politics. You're running for this, so this seems to be what
This is what I care about,
your passion really is.
And I always did. And so it was tough because I love film. Yeah. But I don't particularly necessarily care. Does that make sense?
Yes.
This is what I care about. And so that was the other reason why it was so easy for me to transition, because this is what I was thinking about. And I think you should always be sort of like lining yourself up with where your mind is, you know? And that's where my heart and my mind were, was like, this is where you can make a difference, you know?
And it makes sense because having come from, like you said, a family that came from Marxism from Cuba, and then you transition, you're doing what you do by trade, but also you feel called now to help out the people of Nashville.
Exactly.
Well, best of luck to you, Robbie.
Thank you
so much for being on here, and we'll talk again soon. Absolutely.
In Nashville.
In Nashville, absolutely.
Lunch on
Nashville, take a look at this guy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Another very interesting person I was able to speak with was Amanda Milius, son of famous writer-director John Milius, who directed Conan the Barbarian, Red Dawn, and wrote Apocalypse Now and Dirty Harry. As the daughter of such an esteemed writer-director, I was curious how her parents had shaped her ideas, both artistically and politically. It was a great conversation, and I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the Beau Show. We are here today with Amanda Milius. She's a screenwriter and director. She's really the daughter of Hollywood royalty. Amanda, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Man, I just met you recently, and so I'm learning so much about you and your incredible history. One thing that I focus on my show is entertainment because it's a big part of the culture war. You're a director and a screenwriter, but you're also the daughter of an entertainment family. John Milius is your father, director of Apocalypse Now, Conan the Barbarian. How did that shape who you've become today?
Well, both of my parents were on the right. They definitely leaned conservative, and being in Los Angeles and in Hollywood, that's very unusual. And so the main thing that it really taught me, but besides getting involved in politics, because obviously when I was younger I wasn't involved in politics at all, was really just to not care what people thought about you, and don't go along with the mob. Think for yourself, because we were very outnumbered. And so even when I was like in high school or whatever, they would have to tell me, you know, don't worry, it doesn't matter what all these other people do. It doesn't matter what their point of view is. You have to stay true to your values. And politically speaking, you know, they weren't exactly like super following the daily news. Yeah, they weren't super active in politics, but what they did really care about was the Second Amendment. They're both on the board of the NRA. And so that was sort of my entree into conservative politics. And my mother was an actress. My dad was a big screenwriter, did a lot of the movies that our movement really love, like especially like Red Dawn is like having a big resurgence these days. I feel like people feel like they're living in it. So I think it was interesting for me to see how he kind of maintained his values even though it wasn't popular in Hollywood. And it was a different time because at that time, even though it was unusual, he was still working. He was friends with all of the biggest filmmakers of the time, and it didn't matter that his politics were totally different. But these days, what I tell people is that I really don't think that someone like him, even with all of his talent, he really is a genius, wouldn't have made it. None of these movies would have been made, because these days he would have been canceled before he even got into Hollywood.
Right, I think about Jon Voight and Clint Eastwood. Well, people, of course, want to work with them because they're celebrities and they're at the top of their game. If they were just entering the business now, they wouldn't do so well, would they?
Right, and I think that it's up to a lot of those celebrities that do have that star power and do have the financial security to really hold the line and to say something when people get canceled for their politics. I think we need to be hearing from them. I mean, what are they afraid of? It's like there comes to be a point where there's things that are more important than money, you know? And the country is really in a very, very, very pivotal moment. And so a lot of these people need to ask themselves, you know, if they don't like cancel culture, especially the comedians in Hollywood, if they don't like what's going on, what they're seeing around them, they need to stand up.
How can they stand up? I mean, this is just a off-the-cuff thing, but how can they stand up when it's so one-sided in Hollywood on the left that they feel that it's not truly free speech? I mean, if we're supposed to be artists and promoting artistic integrity and liberty and liberalism with a small L, why don't they stand up for free speech then, for you to have our right to support whatever candidate we want to?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the structure of Hollywood. Obviously, in like the 60s and 70s, it was structured very differently. Even the end of the studio system is one of the things that I think really hurt Hollywood in general, but certainly the fact that the people who have the power aren't just the accountants in Hollywood, now they're foreign accountants. They're not even American accountants. So, you know, let alone the great studio days where people that actually respected art and artists and protected them, that's so far gone. And as you say, I mean, art is supposed to be about being dissident. I mean, that's all of the most important art in the world was always dissident. And so I actually trust that there's going to be an amazing revolution because it's so unappealing, their side, this sterile environment, this ridiculous wokeism and the rules that Hollywood is putting on everything. It's tiresome to everyone. I actually enjoy it when Hollywood gets more and more communist and does awful things because as a dissident filmmaker myself, it's good for me because basically they've made an ideological business decision and they're leaving an entire audience of half the country or more on the table. And they're not just leaving political documentaries like the one I made. They're leaving everything. Every kind of movie you can imagine, comedy, etc. They won't touch it. They're only pushing their agenda. So that leaves a huge, gap for myself and people like me, lots of up-and-coming right-wing or just dissident filmmakers to come and fill that gap. It's an amazing business opportunity.
That's a good point. What led you into politics, into the State Department?
Well, as much as I talk about Hollywood and culture, I had gone to USC Film School, graduated. I had a thesis film that actually did really well. It was touring to 40 different film festivals, and it was doing super well. But the next step when you go to film school, you do your movie, you hope to raise money and make your own thing, or you work in the industry. And everybody, it just was so boring and stale. The environment was so awful. I didn't want to work on any of the movies that people were doing. I didn't want to compete for the grant for the next female director award. Like, I don't want to be a female director. Like, I just want to make movies. Like, I don't care about any of that stuff, and it's just nauseating and gross. So I was so grossed out by the industry and also the people that were in it. I mean, these are some of the most narcissistic, neurotic, unhealthy, bizarre people that exist. And so I was really sick of Los Angeles. So I just kind of went nuts, drove to Nevada, started volunteering for the Trump campaign because I was obsessed with politics. And I met these amazing people, these really hardworking people. And it was an amazing movement. It was like the best time of my life. It was amazing. And so I couldn't leave that. So I just decided I'm going to stayed and worked in the administration, got hired, luckily, in an agency that I care about foreign policy a lot. And was able to hopefully advance the president's agenda during the 3.5 years that I was there.
So you had the brains, you had the beauty too, and you had the talent, and so you went from being the daughter of Hollywood royalty and a great director to using your passion for politics into the State Department, and then you make a movie called The Plot Against the President. So you couldn't get away from cinema for too long, it sounds like.
Well, that was an accident. My friends that were in the administration, I have a lot of people that were very badly affected by the Russia hoax, right? I mean, all of the political appointees were poorly affected by it because they were telling people that we were working for a Russian asset. It's ridiculous. It's bad for the country. So anyway, a lot of my friends were deeply connected to it, and one of them brought me Lee Smith's manuscript manuscript for his book, Plot Against the President. And he was like, this is it. This is the actual true story. It's amazing. I read it and I was like, this is a great idea for a movie. And actually, it was a friend of mine in the admin said, you know, we ought to make this into a movie. You know how to do that, right? And I was like, no, I haven't done that for a while. Like, I left film. I don't want to do that. And I was like, okay, of course we have to do it. I resigned. We started producing the movie. And I actually didn't want to direct it because I thought I wasn't going to direct again. I mean, it's a totally different mind space.
Absolutely.
But it just turned out that it was the right thing to do. And everything fell into place. It's a total, it has to be a God thing because we did that for so fast for under $1 million, which is like unheard of. And it just, every single thing that could have gone wrong or right went right, which is amazing, and I'm very lucky.
That is amazing. Well, congratulations on that. What's your perception of how conservatives are treated in Hollywood right now?
Oh, well, I mean, you can't be conservative in Hollywood. Even me, right, I'm a little bit lucky because my dad is a known conservative. I think a lot of the reasons, you know, my friends in film school, they didn't really bother me too much about politics. Everybody knew I was a Republican. Nobody cared because they knew who my dad was. But even in my work, when I was working for other producers, and you know, you work your way up in Hollywood doing all kinds of jobs, I would never talk about politics at work. And a lot of these people, I understand why they don't. You know, they withstand hearing conversations that they don't participate in because they know if people figured out they were conservative, they would never get hired again, and they have to feed their families. That's why I don't put the onus on them, on the working level folks in Hollywood. I understand why they cannot reveal their politics. It's crazy that we live in America and people have to hide, but what I do want to do is hold people responsible who have these feelings and know that this is wrong and know that it's bad for their art to be this sterile and to be this authoritarian. Those people in Hollywood that have the means, that have been successful, that have power, need to stand up and say enough of cancel culture. I'm not saying they all need to come out and be Republicans. You know, a lot of artists tend to be left-wing. You could argue about that, why that is all the time. I mean, I come from the art world, but it's rare to be a conservative. We need to change that. But in the meantime, you know, I'm not asking these people to come out and all be like, you know, arguing for Trump. I love the president, but I'm not saying they need to be Republicans. But they need to say, no, you can't fire or cancel other talented people because they have differing political opinions. I mean, it's like, it's so obvious to me, and I expect these people to stand up, and I think as cancel culture, because cancel culture just eats itself. The snake is going to eat its own tail. They're going to start, just as they already are, devouring each other alive. When those things start to happen, they have got to stand up and say no to that.
Do you think we'll see more major producers and directors and screenwriters stand up and do exactly what you're saying? Is that the solution? Because you see a lot of, like, I think conservatives sometimes have done a bad job of influencing culture because they're not producing enough content. But also don't think that necessarily the solution is to just make right-wing entertainment.
Absolutely.
That can be preachy.
No, that drives me nuts. No, that drives me so crazy. I mean, that's the other thing. It's like,
silly.
We need to be sending our people to art schools, film schools, etc. We need to be, you know, when your children come home from college and they say, I want to be an artist, I want to be a filmmaker, you got to start saying yes, not no, you have to go to business school because you're going to be an entrepreneur. Because otherwise, we will lose culture forever. And I mean, that is one of the biggest problems that conservatives tend to, and I say this having made a very political movie. I mean, the movie's about the Russiagate hoax. But the next step in dissident culture, it's not going to be political first. It's going to be good stories that are the kinds of things that Americans want to see, and it doesn't have to be political. The last thing I want is for conservatives to go and do exactly what the left does, which is lecture their audience in the wrappings of a story. That's never fun to watch. It's never good. We hate it when the left does it. We shouldn't do it either. And I say this knowing, obviously, my big debut thing was a very political documentary, but there's room for, we've got scripted items in development. We've got all different kinds of content. We've got really weird documentaries you wouldn't expect, and that's the kind of thing I want to be able to do. So it's...
Yeah, I was thinking about like the Irwin brothers. There's a lot of different people out there who put out, stories of redemption, stories of inspiration. Even, and they can get big stars to do it too. Chris Pratt has jumped. I think he's tried to do something as well.
He's obviously a conservative.
Yeah, which is amazing. He hasn't been canceled yet. He's one of the younger ones that's done it. So you kind of hinted at it, but what's next for you then? You've got obviously some content in the pipeline.
Yes, the company that we created called 1AM DC Productions is my production company. We created it just to do Plot Against the President, but it turns out there's such a hunger for new content that we are developing it into an entertainment company that can support all different levels, a handful of feature-length documentaries. We've got 2 scripted pieces in development and a bunch of sort of smaller kind of expose-sized things. We want to be able to support podcasts. We want to basically be able to bring our sort of style and taste into the movement. I mean, that really is one of the things that drove me nuts about the conservative side, is that folks will get really issue-oriented. They'll be like, oh, I really care about X issue. I read a book about it. Therefore, I know how to make a movie about it. And that's how you get these movies where you're just like, this isn't a movie. Right. It's an educational video about something, but there's no craft to it. So, I mean, I trained my whole life to make movies, and I'm not saying I'm the only one that can do it, but got to have people not come from the issue side, but come from the art and the craft side, and then be influenced by the issues and the politics.
That's a great point, which also is going to entail, though, enabling and empowering those artists to be able to speak out and do it.
Which is where our donor class comes in, because the left, the donor class, knows they need to fund politics, they need their long march through the institutions, the schools, everything else. Our donor class tends to get very animated around elections, and they love to fund campaigns. And I think that's great. We must continue to do that. But the interesting thing about film is it's an industry, right? You're not lighting your money on fire. You're actually influencing the culture. It exists forever. The movie lives forever. Your values and your culture are being pushed along, and guess what? You're also going to make your money back and make a profit, because you're not donating it. You're not lighting your money on fire.
Exactly.
It's an industry, and it's a very profitable one.
Why have Republicans not seen that? I'm thinking
that's
about
a great question.
This is exactly the conversation I wanted to have at CPAC, and thank God you're here to do it with me, because I'm thinking Sheldon Adelson, of course, he's passed on, but you've got the Ricketts family, you've got all these multi-billion-dollar people who do exactly as you said. They support a candidate, boom, torches up in flames.
Yeah.
Where's the return on investment in that?
Right.
There's none. But if you're investing in culture, in a product like you're talking about that has a long shelf life, that would be the way to go. How do you convince those people to invest in that?
Well, that's what we're doing. I've been on the road for a year, obviously doing the movie, then promoting the movie, and now we've been doing a lot of meetings with investors for the upcoming production company that we're putting together. So we're not funding project by project by project. We're funding the entire kind of angle that we have. And I think that's the way to do it, because you minimize risk, and this is what you learn in film school, the way you're supposed to fund films. But I think they're changing. I think our donor class is learning that. And frankly, a lot of our people have always wanted to be involved in films. Our folks miss Hollywood, and they like it. So I think things are changing. We've had a lot of really productive conversations, but we really have to. I mean, it's really the left does this. The left spends just as much money, funding these corrupt district attorneys in all of these different cities and states, but they also fund they fund newspapers, media conglomerates, everything from film development, everything. They fund all of this, and our people, we have to fight on that battlefield. And I have an interest in saying this because I'm fundraising for my production company, but
it's part of a greater effort.
I really feel like what we are providing to the country, there's so few angles to do that. We've got to protect that. And there's the good news. I'll end on a happier note. The generation that's sort of coming up now, there are a lot of really cool, dissident artist kids that are I'm really excited about finding them, funding their movies, developing the talent. I like being in the producer's chair, probably more even than I like directing. And I think that this sort of Zoomer generation actually has a lot of really cool dissident artists up and coming.
That's inspiring.
Because it's the most punk rock thing you can be, is MAGA. I mean, during 2016 and whatnot.
It is the most
because if you think about it, the corporations are all telling these people, oh, you have to have the rainbow flag and be woke about everything and yada, yada, yada. So the counterculture is swinging back.
Yeah. All right, my final question to you, as a cinephile and as a director, what is your favorite movie of all time?
Well, the top slot kind of changes out depending on my mood, but what I always have really in the number 2 slot is this very nostalgic movie about Los Angeles called The Long Goodbye by Robert Altman. And I'm really, when I was in film school, I wrote my thesis about the sort of movement of the noir film into the 70s sort of retake on the noir. I love one of the biggest influences on Plot Against the President was this movie called All the President's Men by Alan Pakula, who did a trilogy in the 70s that's called the Paranoia Trilogy, and it's all about surveillance. It's some of the most beautiful footage of Washington, D.C. It includes the Parallax View, All the President's Men, and Clute, which are just these, I love the 70s view of Washington. I've gotten, just because I was also inundating myself with every Washington, D.C. movie before I made Plot Against the President, Washington is a natural location for noir because of the buildings, the way the buildings are so brutalist and harsh and makes the individual feel small. It's always raining, it's dark, and that's what really comes across in Plot Against the President. It's a moody spy thriller. It's not just a homework assignment about politics. It's a moody, noirish spy thriller, and those are the kinds of movies that I really love.
Well, you've got great passion for it. Amanda Milius, thank you so much for joining me on The Beau Show, and best of luck on your movie. Everyone go out and watch and see The Plot Against the President.
It's on Amazon, it's on iTunes, and it is available on DVD. If you're afraid that it's going to get removed from the internet, it's on DVD at Walmart.com and Amazon.
It's a good thing that we still have the physical product, I suppose, too,
it
right?
Actually is. I didn't know that, but that's a big thing, yeah.
We've got to hold on to something. Thank you, Amanda, so much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.